For more than 40 years, my family's farm had been my entire world. 3,500 acres of rolling hills, towering old oak trees, and memories carved into every corner of that land. It wasn't just property to us. It was our legacy, something that had been passed down through generations of hard work and dedication. My great-grandfather had bought the original land. My grandfather expanded it over the years, slowly adding more acres whenever he could afford it. Then my father spent his life teaching me how to work it, how to respect it, and how to keep it alive for the next generation. That farm wasn't just where I lived. It was who I was. When a brand new housing development started popping up next door a few years ago, we barely paid attention to it. Rows of identical houses, perfect little lawns, and of course their overly strict homeowners association. None of that concerned us. We had been there long before they arrived, and our land was classified as agricultural property, which meant their HOA rules didn't apply to us. Or at least, that's what I believed. Then one Tuesday morning, a letter showed up in my mailbox that turned my world upside down. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of joke. It was a foreclosure notice. Not from a bank, from the HOA next door. I actually laughed when I first read it. It had to be a clerical error, or some ridiculous misunderstanding. According to the letter, I supposedly owed thousands of dollars in unpaid HOA dues and fines. Fines for what exactly? Apparently my grass was too long, and my barn wasn't painted the correct shade of beige. It was so absurd I immediately called the number listed on the notice, expecting someone to apologize and fix the mistake. Instead, I got Karen. Now, that wasn't her real name, but it fit her perfectly. She was a textbook example of an HOA president. Smug, condescending, and completely convinced she held absolute authority. She calmly informed me that several years earlier, when the county boundaries had been redrawn, a tiny overlooked sliver of my property, less than a quarter acre, had technically ended up inside the jurisdiction of their housing development. And according to their bylaws, that meant my entire 3,500-acre property now fell under their HOA authority, which meant their rules and their fees. She happily explained that they had been sending notices and violation letters for years, but they had been mailed to a P.O. box that I hadn't used in over 20 years. It was an old address listed on some ancient county map. They knew exactly where I lived. They saw me drive past their perfectly identical houses almost every day. This wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. I told her the whole thing was ridiculous. My land was agricultural, and there was no way they had authority over it. Then I told her I would see them in court. She laughed. "The auction is in 30 days, she said calmly. "You might want to start packing." That was the moment panic truly set in. I immediately hired a lawyer, a very good one, but the legal system moves painfully slow. We filed injunctions, motions, and every legal maneuver we could think of. But the HOA had clearly been planning this for a long time. They delayed hearings, buried us in paperwork, and used every technical loophole they could find. It soon became obvious why they wanted my land so badly. A developer had already lined up plans for it. My family's farm was going to become something with a soulless name like the estates at Oak Creek. The day of the auction was the worst day of my life. I stood there powerless as my entire world was sold off for pennies on the dollar to a grinning developer, while Karen and the HOA board stood nearby celebrating like they had just won the Super Bowl. They were literally high-fiving each other. The sheriff delivered my eviction notice the very next day. I had 1 week to leave the only home I had ever known. The first few nights sleeping on a friend's couch were torture. All I felt was anger and despair. I kept replaying the auction in my mind over and over again. Their smug smiles, the way they looked at me like I was nothing. I wanted revenge, but not just any revenge. I wanted to tear down their perfect little kingdom, the same way they had torn apart my life. And I wanted to do it legally. So I started spending my days in the county law library, surviving on cheap coffee and pure determination. I read everything I could find: HOA covenants, state property laws, corporate regulations, filing requirements. For weeks I found nothing useful. Their rules seemed airtight, built specifically to protect people like Karen. But one night, buried deep in a section about corporate governance, I finally found something. A loophole. A tiny but beautiful loophole. The HOA was registered as a nonprofit corporation with the state. And according to state law, if a nonprofit corporation failed to hold its required annual meetings and file official minutes for 3 consecutive years, any member in good standing could petition the court to appoint them as receiver. That receiver would then have full authority to manage and even dissolve the corporation's assets. My heart started pounding the moment I read it. The next morning, I rushed to the county records office and pulled the HOA's corporate filings. And there it was. Or rather, there wasn't. They had filed their original paperwork years ago. But for the last 4 years, nothing. No meeting records. No board updates. No financial filings. They had been so busy writing citations for things like unapproved garden gnomes that they forgot to do the most basic paperwork required to keep their own organization legal. Their little kingdom was technically a ghost ship, and I was about to become its captain. The first step was becoming a member of the HOA in good standing, which was tricky, considering they had just taken my land. But remember that tiny sliver of property that started this entire nightmare? The developer who bought my farm had zero interest in that quarter-acre strip. It was awkward and practically useless to him. To him, it was a rounding error. To me, it was the key to everything. Through a third party, I managed to buy that strip of land back for just a few $100s. The moment the deed was transferred into my name, I paid the HOA dues they claimed were owed on that specific parcel. Just like that, I became a member in good standing of the very HOA that had destroyed my life. I immediately filed a petition in court. Even my lawyer, who had been skeptical at first, started smiling when he realized what we had found. The case was almost effortless. The HOA barely even attempted to defend themselves. They sent Karen to the hearing, and she tried arguing with the judge the same way she argued with homeowners about mailbox colors. The judge was not impressed. After reviewing the records, he made his decision in less than 15 minutes. He officially appointed me as the sole receiver of the HOA corporation, which meant I now had complete authority over every asset it controlled. And what is an HOA's biggest asset? The properties it governs. The first thing I did with my new authority was call a special meeting. The entire HOA board showed up. Karen sat front and center, looking confused and furious. They thought they could simply vote me out. I let them talk for a while before my lawyer stood up and explained the situation. You could literally watch the color drain from their faces. I wasn't just another board member. I was their receiver, their ruler, their judge and executioner all in one. And the court had handed me the power. As receiver, I announced that my duty was to dissolve the corporation and liquidate its assets to settle its liabilities. And conveniently, I had already identified several liabilities. For example, the massive legal bill I incurred fighting their illegal foreclosure, and a very large consulting fee for the time I spent correcting their years of mismanagement. Karen nervously asked what assets I planned to liquidate. I simply smiled. All of them. According to their own bylaws, the HOA had the authority to place liens on homes for unpaid dues. As the new authority of the HOA, I also had the power to call all debts due immediately, and even better, I had the authority to set the fees. So I held an emergency vote. Since I was the only eligible voter at that point, I voted to impose a one-time special assessment fee on every homeowner in the development, a capital improvement fee to cover the costs of dissolving the HOA. The fee amount? Roughly the full market value of each of their houses, and it was due within 24 hours. Of course, no one could pay it, which meant I followed their procedures perfectly. I placed liens on every single house in the neighborhood, all 150 of them. Then I scheduled an auction, a bulk auction. This time, I wasn't standing helplessly in the crowd. I was the one holding the gavel. Standing on the steps of the community clubhouse, I looked out at the same shocked faces that once watched me lose my farm. Karen was in the front row, crying openly. One by one, I sold every house in that development. All of them. The buyer, the same developer who had originally purchased my farm. He was thrilled to acquire an entire neighborhood for a fraction of its value, especially since he already planned to tear it down and build something new. The residents had 30 days to leave. The irony was almost unbearable. They tried suing, of course, but they were suing a corporation that no longer existed, under bylaws that I had already dissolved as the court-appointed receiver. They had nothing. After the auction, I used the proceeds to pay off every liability, including reimbursing myself for every single dollar I had lost. Then, with the remaining money, I went straight to the developer, and I bought my farm back, every acre. The day moving trucks rolled into that neighborhood to carry their belongings away, I sat on my front porch exactly where I belonged. I watched the sunset stretch across my hills, my fields, my land. They thought their petty rules and fake authority could destroy me. But they forgot one very important thing. You don't mess with a man's legacy. You don't mess with his land. And if you do, you better make sure you filed your paperwork. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice.